Hello everybody, this is Mark from We Talk Art. In this video we're going to talk about graphite. And as I was researching this video, I was reminded that there are a lot of graphite for a lot of different applications beyond art. But we're going to talk about graphite for artists. This is the old yellow number 2. You probably wrote some of your first letters with one of these and possibly even your first book report. And it's a wood pencil with a lead in it, which isn't lead, it's graphite. How confusing is that for a second grader, right? It was also the preferred tool by many students to deface a bazillion school desks. But actually, we're not gonna talk about this pencil. We're artists, we use real pencils. So we're gonna be using artist graphite. So we're gonna be looking at a variety of pencils, blocks, and powders and water-soluble graphite, and then we're going to look at a few things that aren't quite graphite, but you're going to love them. So let's roll the intro and get into this. So we're talking about graphite. First, what is graphite? The name graphite comes from the Greek word grapheme, which means to write. Now, personally, I think it would have been cooler if the Greeks called it to draw, which is haku, and then we'd have a lot of really happy artists. And then maybe they wouldn't be thinking that this thing in there is lead. Maybe it'd be haku. Maybe that'd be cool enough that we wouldn't be calling it lead. Anyway, I digress. So what is graphite? Graphite is a crystalline form of carbon. It is relatively soft. It is opaque. Generally is gray, tending toward black in color, and has a metallic sheen, which causes a lot of grief for graphite artists because it kind of tends to lower the contrast and make it shine a little bit. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the video. There's some solutions there. For artists, graphite is an art supply many consider foundational. You can make final artwork with graphite, but you can also sketch with it. You can do studies. You can work out details or compositions for bigger pieces. You can also do underdrawings for paintings or pastels or printmaking or just about anything. But I think the strongest value is its ability to be used for sketching, to experiment, learn, and explore. I also believe that a lot of final art has graphite in the process somewhere. I think graphite is the unsung hero of art. Something that's important to artists about graphite is that it is considered to be an archival medium, meaning it shouldn't fade and be relatively permanent. Now, as with a lot of other art supplies, the surface, the paper you put it on, has to be archival. So if it's not acid-free, all bets are off. But generally, graphite is an archival medium. I also feel that drawing is a natural lead-in to other forms of art. I've talked to artists that have skipped the drawing stage in their learning process and now regret it. Drawing is a great learning tool, great way to explore your visual likes and dislikes, find a voice, figure out the vocabulary of art, or just get things out of your head. Drawing also has the ability to really lock a place, a time, or an event in your head, in your memory, even better than taking a photograph. The act of sketching, quickly rendering something, can allow you to process a lot of visual information very quickly and explore a place, an idea, things that challenge you, figure out the things you're looking at, or work toward a bigger project. There's a reason so many artists carry a sketchbook around with them all the time, and it's also why famous artists' sketchbooks are so coveted. This is often where you do your real work to get to your masterpiece. Sketching can also help you with one of the most important aspects of anything in art. It forces you to learn to see. Art is about craft, knowing your medium, learning how to express yourself with your medium, but before all of that, you need to know how to see. This is the thing that allows you to actually draw the thing that's in front of you or the thing you're looking at. This is a really big subject and can probably be a whole video to itself, but if you're interested in that, I would really recommend the book Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. It's a complete course on drawing, but it really concentrates on this concept of learning how to see. The brilliant thing about drawing in graphite is that all you really need is that broken number 2 pencil and paper. That's it. But as I said, There are better options, and we're going to talk about those. But it really doesn't take much more than that. You could draw almost anywhere because you really need very little to draw. The tools are small and fit into a small space. The cost of the tools are very affordable, and the setup time is almost nothing, and the takedown time is pretty much the same. Graphite options can allow you to draw as fast, as loose, and rough as you want, or as detailed, rendered out, and finished as you'd like. Graphite is forgiving because you can erase it, and it is portable because it is small. It is a wonderful medium to work in, and I can almost guarantee you if you learn to draw with graphite, it will help you in whatever art form that you work in or wish to work in. Let's start with a little history of graphite and why it's called lead. Before the 16th century, when graphite was discovered, the Romans used a variety of soft metals to write or draw with, mainly lead or lead mixed with tin. This is a stylus that has silver in it for silver point drawing, something that was also a classic drawing tool. This is probably not quite what the Romans would use, but it would be something similar to this. Early in the 16th century in England, a farmer found a large deposit of high-grade graphite under a tree that fell over on his land. No one in the area knew what to call it, and so it ended up getting the name black lead. The resourceful farmer used it to mark his sheep. It turns out that graphite, black lead, was much better at writing than previously used lead. The first graphite tools were mainly just graphite sticks wrapped in string or other materials. The graphite was softer, made a much darker mark, and worked on more surfaces than lead. And as an added bonus, it didn't kill you. By the end of the 16th century, Johann Sebastian Staedtler of Germany, this Staedtler, and Nicolas Jacques Conté in France, this Conté, started to make wooden case pencils that were the beginning of the modern pencil. Conté also added clay to the mix to create different grades of hardness to the leads, which brings us to the modern day drawing pencil. Before we get our hands dirty with black lead, I think it's important to talk about surfaces. These are the things that you put graphite on to make your art. Mainly, for graphite, it is paper. What a lot of people don't understand is that for almost all art supplies, the surface you use it on can have as much influence on the final outcome as the product itself. Putting a nice medium on the wrong surface can make it look like crap, and graphite is no exception to this. So matching the right medium with the right surface is critical, kind of like matching the right wine with the right meal. As I stated for graphite, the pairing typically is paper, yet there's a lot of types of paper with different surfaces, thickness, colors, materials, sizing, most of which will dictate how it will look in your application. Some characteristics that make a good drawing paper include the surface texture, referred to as tooth. For graphite, you want a surface texture, tooth, for the graphite to adhere to. Too smooth will not pull the graphite off the pencil consistently and may mean the graphite on the paper may smudge too easily. Too much tooth and it is hard to get good coverage. A good drawing paper will have a surface that can handle some work with the tools including erasers. If the surface is too fragile, the paper surface will abrade or mar, wrinkle, or even rip. Most artists like their drawing paper to have a little weight to it. The thickness of the paper is usually expressed in pounds, which refers to the weight in pounds of a ream of paper, which is 500 sheets of the size that it's molded in. The metric version is GSM, which is grams per square meter. For example, a nice heavy drawing paper or a mixed media paper would be about 100-pound paper, or 270 GSM. Some will be much lighter, and others will be a lot heavier, but this gives you an idea what the numbers mean. Many people who are new to drawing or art will often gravitate to a cheap paper such as sketch paper that many manufacturers make and can be found in traditional sketchbooks like this, either hardbound or sometimes they're ring-bound. They will have an inexpensive sketch paper in it. You can also find sketch paper in pads. Yet it should be noted that sketch paper is not always the right choice for all projects. It is cheap, although it does have a good surface that works with graphite, and it is great for what its name implies. It's good for sketching, quick, rough, unfinished rendering. That's the definition of sketch, in case you wondered. Although it is thin with 50 or 60 pounds or 75 to 90 GSM, and often not very opaque. This is a sheet of sketch paper. You can see it's fairly thin, although it does have a good surface quality. It adheres graphite fairly well, and it will allow you to fill in an area fairly nicely. This is an HB pencil. But it also isn't very opaque, so when you put something else underneath it, you can see that you can see through to the drawings below, which means it can be good for tracing. But as a general rule, it's not a great paper for a final project. Sketch paper can also be limiting in how heavy-handed you can be with the paper. If you press too hard, you're going to end up marring the paper, and too much erasing with the wrong eraser can blemish the surface, causing problems if you're going to try to draw continuously with it. So for these reasons, it's just an adequate drawing paper, and again, would probably not lend itself to final artwork. It rips easy too. And the final thing to keep in mind with sketch papers is that cheaper sketch papers may not be made in a way that will last. They may end up yellowing or degrading or cracking over time, again, making them not a great option for final artwork. Despite this, it is an inexpensive paper that will allow you to draw, play, and experiment without the feeling that you're wasting your money on a more expensive paper, which this in itself has a great deal of value when learning to draw. You definitely don't want to be feeling like your paper is too expensive to play on, because play is really important for art. Probably the most common type of paper for graphite pencil drawing will be draw or draw type paper, sold by many manufacturers in many forms. These are usually inexpensive, yet have a good surface for graphite and are thicker than a sketch paper at 70 to 90 pounds or 100 to 130 GSM, and is often more opaque. These papers will often also be pH neutral and made to last for many years with no yellowing or falling apart. Check the cover and make sure it says that it's pH neutral or archival. You can usually find these papers in pads and sometimes in journals. This is a sheet of draw paper. As you can see, the surface quality is generally pretty smooth. And we'll get our HB pencil again, and you'll see it takes the graphite really well. You can create a very nice, consistent filled in area. If you go over it again, you can even get it to be darker. And that's because that surface has some surface texture, but not so much that it causes the paper to show through when you're drawing on it. The paper itself is more opaque than you might find. You can still slightly see the images underneath, but they're not nearly as much as the sketch paper. And again, this is going to be a more stable paper for longer term use and final projects. It does come in different thicknesses, and you can get a heavy drawing paper that has a really nice heft to it. Another good option is mixed media paper, especially if you work in other mediums beyond graphite, such as pen and ink, water-based markers, or watercolor. I will almost always buy a sketchbook or journal with at least mixed media paper in it. Mixed media paper is usually thicker, around 80 to 115 pounds, or about in the range of 185 GSM, and has a sizing in it to control how much and how fast it will absorb wet things. Most mixed media papers have a good surface for graphite, although some have more tooth than you may want, making it difficult to get a solid black or gray area where the paper is not showing through. That's too much tooth. You will learn to feel the paper and know what is right. You can also compare it to a draw paper in the store. So this draw paper here is really smooth. I have two pieces of mixed media paper here. One is a Strathmore and one is a Fabriano. The Strathmore is a little higher end than the Fabriano as far as price, but the show here will start on the Strathmore with this HB pencil. And you see you can get, it'll take in a fair amount of graphite, and you can get a nice dark area, a little bit of paper showing through. And then on the Fabriano, you can see right away that the tooth of the paper, a lot more of the paper shows through, making a little bit harder to get a darker area. So that's the Strathmore. And then that's the Fabriano. So again, choosing the right mixed media papers is important, and you should learn to kind of feel the surfaces to see if they're going to work for your style and technique. A step up from drawing paper would be Bristol paper, named for where it was invented in Bristol, England. It is a stiffer paper than drawing paper due to the way it's made, yet their weights are much the same as the other paper, although you can get much heavier Bristol papers. Bristol paper comes in different surfaces, usually a smooth vellum, and sometimes you can find it in a plate surface, which is very smooth, which generally probably wouldn't be recommended for pencil. It should be noted that a lot of manufacturers make Bristol in at least the vellum and the smooth surface, and sometimes their pads look identical between the two, and you have to make sure you're buying the right paper. Make sure it says vellum if you're looking for vellum, or smooth, and that will be often the only difference you'll see on the cover of this paper. So it's really easy to buy the wrong one. You can also open these and feel them inside, and you'll feel the smooth and the vellum. They're very different in texture. So I have two pieces of Bristol paper here, and you can see that these papers are really thick. They really will tend to hold up to a lot of abuse, and they have a nice perceived heavy value, and they'll last quite a long time. The difference in these two papers is one is a vellum surface and one is a smooth surface. I don't have plate here, but it's very similar to the smooth, if not smoother. And so I typically recommend for graphite that you want to be using the vellum surface. It has a surface quality much like the draw paper we were looking at earlier. And again, the stiffer, thicker paper itself makes for a much more pleasant drawing experience. So I'm not exactly sure if you'll be able to see the difference in textures in these papers. This sheet here is the smooth, and then the one behind it is the vellum. If you go into an art supply store, you'll feel it right away. So let's start with the vellum. I'm going to do the same little swatch here so you can get an idea of how the graphite will lay onto it. And I think you'll notice right away that it's a lot easier for me to make a really consistent area with this paper. And again, if I go over it a second time, I can make it very dense and dark. And that's the tooth that's on this paper grabs that graphite very well. The smooth surface, on the other hand, will probably be a little too smooth, and you'll see that the pencil just wants to glide on this paper. No matter how hard I press, even though the paper itself isn't showing through like the thicker tooth paper, it still is hard for me to get any amount of graphite on it. Although when I go this way, it gets a little bit better. But you can see these two differences. This is going to hold a lot more graphite. The other thing I would guess is smudging is going to be, this is going to be a lot more smudgy on this smooth paper. So again, generally for drawing, I would recommend the vellum paper if you're going to draw on graphite. I think you'll find just overall that this paper is really slippery and too smooth. And this will make a much nicer mark, much better quality. Smooth, and this is the vellum. There are a large variety of other papers that people may choose to draw on and have a range of different characteristics that might appeal to your artistic sense. Some printmaking papers lend themselves to drawing, and hot press watercolor paper, although a little pricey, can be a great option for final projects. Some companies make an illustration board for drawing too. This is the thickness of 4-ply mat board, about 1/8 of an inch, and has a range of surfaces similar to the drawing papers, with usually a smooth or a vellum surface. Some popular companies that are making paper for drawing are Strathmore, Canson, Legion, B Paper, Arches, Borden Riley, Bin Fang, and Winsor Newton, just to name a few. There's a lot of options if you go into a good art supply store. The modern drawing pencil is a great drawing tool, but that's not the only option in graphite. But we're going to start with them. Drawing pencils can be found for as low as $1 and as much as $3. What do you get for a better pencil? For starters, the lead, the graphite, and in most cases the clay, can be of a higher quality, causing a less gritty result, especially in your harder pencils. Sometimes you'll find the core sizes of the pencils also have a difference in how thick they are. You'll also find that different manufacturers may make certain pencils in their line, such as softer pencils, have a bigger core size. A thicker core size can allow for different mark making, a little bit more versatile, a little easier to do fill-in areas and stuff like that. The other thing that can make a difference is the wood that's used for the pencil. A higher quality pencil will have a higher quality wood. Sometimes that would be cedar. And finally, a higher quality pencil, the lead that's in it will be glued more securely within the pencil, making it sharpen easier, more robust if you drop it, and all around just a better pencil. Just happens that a few minutes ago I was trying to sharpen a pencil for a demonstration of a cheaper brand, and I finally gave up. Couldn't get it sharp because it had broken internally, so just pieces kept coming off. So high quality pencils have some benefits. Some of the manufacturers that sell pencils in the United States include General Pencil, which is the only one that I know of that's made in the United States, Koh-i-Noor, Tombow, Prismacolor. Some higher end ones are Staedtler, Faber Castell, Derwent, and Graphitint. Generally, any of these pencils will do good, but you might find that some have benefits that work good for you. If you're just learning, buy something that you won't mind using a lot, because play is important. At the same time, pencils are pretty cheap, so you might want to buy a variety of them until you figure out which ones work best for you. So as I mentioned in the history of graphite, Conte figured out that you could add clay to the graphite mix to change the hardness. That results in the different grades of hardnesses pencils come in, but you can see they're marked on the end and they define what grade they are, which we'll be talking about, that system. It should also be noted that a lot of the different graphites we'll talk about do have the same grading system for hardness. Choosing the right grades to work with can really make a difference in your drawing techniques, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that. So how does this work? The hardness of the pencil is described by the grade. The grade is mostly broken into two types, H for hard and B for black, or soft. In the middle of this range, you'll find an HB pencil, and that's the one that's equivalent to the old number 2. Fortunately, drawing pencils all mostly follow the HB system. So on the soft side of the HB, you're going to find graphite grades that start with a B pencil and then will progressively get softer from 2B up to 8B. In some cases, it's 9B depending on the manufacturer. And on the hard side of the HB, you're going to find an H pencil for hard and then a progression of 2H to 8H for harder, progressively harder pencils. Some manufacturers have a 9H. Some pencil lines also have an F pencil, and that stands for fine, and that is similar to an HB but will hold a finer tip. Often that's a pencil that gets skipped over, but most lines have it. It should give you a mark very similar to the HB, but the tip should stay sharper longer in theory. And that F fits between the HB and the H on this scale of hardness. As you can see from this example, each of these grades make a variation in darkness depending on how hard you press. So as you can see with these swatches, I started in the upper left-hand corner really lightly, and then I progressed down and try to get it harder and harder in the lower right. I try to stay consistent with the same amount of pressure for all the pencils. And so you can see the range of softnesses the pencil makes, and that dictates how much graphite is put down, which dictates how dark the line is or the area that you're filling in is. A few notes. The harder the pencil is, the lighter the line it will make for the same pressure. Very hard pencils, 7H, 8H, 9H, are going to be very hard and can be a bit scratchy, and if you put too much pressure on them, they may damage fragile papers. Hard pencils will stay sharper longer, meaning you can use them for longer between sharpening cycles. Harder pencils, as long as you don't mar the surface of the paper, typically are easier to erase and less prone to smudging. This may greatly depend on the paper that you're using and the technique you're using. Soft pencils will make a much darker mark, putting down much more graphite for the same amount of pressure. Soft pencils will not hold their sharp point very long. They'll dull very rapidly, requiring a lot of sharpening if you're trying to make fine line marks. Softer pencils may require a better pencil sharpener because they tend to be a little bit more fragile and prone to breaking. Soft pencils typically will smudge easier and will not erase as easy as the harder pencils, again, depending on your technique and the paper that you're using. There is a technique I'm going to show you in a little while that makes them a little easier to erase, which is helpful. It is important to keep these things in mind when you choose your grades of pencils that you're going to draw with. Different manufacturers offer their drawing pencils in different sets and sizes, so you'll be able to get different ranges of grades in different number of pencils. Often a 6 pencil set with different grades ranging from 4H to 4B is a good selection, although some manufacturers sell all 20 in a set, and then sometimes you'll find them in 4 pencil sets. A good art supply store will also sell pencils individually and sometimes will allow you to test them with little test pads. This can be really helpful to get you into what pencils you're going to need. So keep in mind, you don't need to buy all 20-something grades of graphite pencils. I'm kind of a lunatic and I bought the 20 Staedtler pencil box of all their grades, more from curiosity and play than anything else. You probably will not need those. You're going to probably end up selecting a handful of good pencils that really work for you, that give you a nice range. I sometimes draw with only 2 pencils, starting at somewhere around a 3H or 4H, and then on the other side I'll do a 4B. Sometimes I'll throw an HB in the middle, and sometimes I'll use a much darker pencil to create contrast. But for the most part, you're only going to need a handful of pencils. So don't get lured into buying lots and lots of grades of pencils. You may start out with quite a few until you narrow down what you're going to use, but I'm pretty confident what you're going to find is at some point you're going to narrow it down to just a handful of pencils that work for you. So here's an example of me starting with kind of my range of pencils I'm usually working with. I'll start with a 4H, and I'm going to start with it light, and as I start bearing down on it, it's going to start getting darker till I'm at some point where I'm going to feel like I might start damaging the paper. So you can see that range there. That is going on that. And then I can go to an HB, and again I'll start with it lightly, and it's a little too sharp, and as I progress across, I'll start bearing down on it, getting a darker line. And again, at some point you're going to either be at the point where you're going to feel like you're going to break the pencil or mar the paper, which you don't want to do. And then I will go to a 4B. And as you can see, if I kind of rotate the pencil a little as I'm using it, because it's going to dull really fast, you can see I'm going from a really light to a fairly dark. So just to give you an example, I'm going to add the 9H and the 9B, which Staedtler make them both ends. Not all the manufacturers go that far. Some of them end at 8H and 8HB. So the 9H, put on this side, and you probably can hear, but this pencil is super scratchy, and I can see that it's indenting the paper as I use it, even at a light pressure. And as I press harder, it gets even scratchier and harder. And then on the other end, we're going to go with the 9B. As you can see, because it gets soft so fast that I kind of end up having to rotate the pencil to keep it making its darkest mark. But all of these are very similar amounts of pressure. I try to keep it fairly consistent. One thing to note, I was talking about earlier, is how shiny graphite is. And if you can get it at the right light angle, you can see how it ends up kind of shining. A lot of graphite artists try to avoid in different ways, and we'll be talking about that some more. This is the way I approach a drawing. I start with a harder pencil, such as a 4H, and lightly get my major shapes in and composition elements and so forth. I will work up to then a softer pencil, which can be of HB, which is that one right in the middle, to start to firm up my lines, to get more contrast, establish some more tone and depth. And then I'll finish off the drawing with a softer pencil. This would be like a 4B or softer, and I'll work in my shadows, create more contrast, increase the sense of depth, and firm up my most important lines. Keep in mind when you're drawing, contrast brings things forward, softer, less contrast pushes things back, firmer lines pulls things forward. So the more you create definition and detail, that drawing will pull those elements forward, and then you want to leave your background with less detail, lighter line work, and so forth, and that'll push it back. That'll give your drawing a lot of depth. And that can be achieved using the different grades of pencils. Beyond the standard wood pencil, you can often find companies that make woodless pencils. These are graphite formed in the shape of a pencil, but it's all graphite. These graphite sticks are coated in a clear sealant so you don't get your hands messy, and can be sharpened just like a normal pencil, and you can create a pretty sharp tip. One thing to note is the companies that generally sell these two are Kuretake, but Corner I know makes them, and I think Art Alternatives might make a set of these. They generally are on the softer end, so you'll find that the 2B, 4B, 6B, maybe 8B are what you're going to find these pencils in, not so much on the hard side of the scale. One of the real advantages of these is that because they're all lead, they have this really large surface here that can create a lot of different marks. And you can see this one was sharpened pretty well. This is a 6B, but you can come in here with the edge of the pencil and fill in a large area very smoothly with it. And so this can be a lot of fun, but at the same time you can get a lot of nice little detail work too. And then I go to my edge, and then I can come in here and create some interesting line work with the edge of the pencil. So it can be a really fun, interesting pencil to use. Another thing that's kind of handy if you're going to have one of these kind of pencils is one of these little sanding blocks. And these can allow you to shape the tip of the pencil in different ways. So if you're looking for something that's not quite as sharp, you can come in here and make a bit of dust on your paper, which you can do things with that also. But now I have a duller tip to this, and I can come in here and firm up this line work with something that's not quite as sharp. So they're a very versatile pencil to have. One thing to keep in mind about any of these things that I'm going to be talking about, including these full graphite pencils or blocks or so forth, an interesting thing happens with the amount of pressure that you have to put on these. The larger the surface area that's touching the paper at any one time, the lighter it's going to be because it's kind of pressure dependent. And you can see if I pull this up this way, I'm going to get a really dark line. But if I get this down lighter, it's really hard to create that same darkness. And that's because of the amount of surface area that's touching the paper and the amount of pressure per square millimeter or whatever that's being applied. And so it can be kind of hard with these larger things to get really dark areas. So these graphite blocks come in different sizes and shapes like these. This one here is a 4B. You can see I scratched on that, which kind of says something. This one is a 6B. But sometimes it gets hard to kind of identify these down the road. And so it may make sense to mark them for that. But they are really handy for creating this. And the smoothness of the paper is going to have an effect on how well these work. Smoothness, tooth, and then how much pressure and the angle will dictate, how these things end up working for you. But they're a good tool to use when you're drawing and can be used great to add atmosphere, gray areas. Or as I was doing earlier, graphite powder, which can be acquired in different ways. So this is a much bigger sand block. It's actually made for charcoal by Nitram, but these paddles can be found. But these can be acquired at your art supply store for sometimes $1 or less. But you can go in here, put some graphite down, and then you can then smudge that in different ways, even use your finger. So lots of fun, create a mess. You might want to put a glove on before you do that. A lesser known pencil option is referred to as a lead holder, which should be a graphite holder. Graphite for these lead holders is sold in a variety of different ways, similar to the wooded pencils, but in a lesser range. Most manufacturers offer a 6H through a 6B in just the core leads for 2 mil lead holders, and for the bigger ones, the 5.6 mil lead holders, there's even a less range. So these look like this. So this is the 5.6 mil lead holder, and you can see it has a really big, thick lead. It can be extended out so you can get a lot of distance there. And the 2 mil lead holders look something like these guys here. So they're basically, they look like somewhat like a mechanical pencil, which we're going to talk about in a second, but they have a 2 mil core lead in it. These are kind of a nice option for drawing because of the slightly thicker lead, and the fact that you can extend it out gives you a lot more options in how you hold a pencil. A lot of people like to hold a pencil overhand, kind of more this style than the drawing style. I still tend to draw that way. Some people like to draw this way, and you can get it. It allows you to fill in areas really nicely. And then when you're holding a pencil this way, your wrist actually has less flexibility and consistency in the way it makes a circle or movement. But if you do more motion from here, you can actually put your paper on an easel. You'll find that your mark making is much more smooth and consistent, opposed to trying to do a similar mark with your wrist, and that's a great example. So overhand has some advantages for that. It works good if you can prop your paper up using an easel or something like that. And that's what lead holders value is. The other thing about lead holders is that they have different sharpeners. You can, of course, use the paddle sandpaper that I was talking about before, and this can be used to make different consistencies of sharpness, but there's also a variety of sharpeners for it. A lot of these pencils will have a sharpener built into the tip, and you can just put this on the end and then that will sharpen it. So that's really convenient. They also make these little sharpeners that look like this, which would usually have a shinier blade, but look kind of like that. And then the pencil lead can go into the end here as such, and then they can be sharpened that way. So that's another way to sharpen these pencils. And then the final way, which is actually the best way, is you get one of these. And this, several manufacturers make that. This, I know Staedtler makes it. This one looks like it's made by Prismacolor. But you have to extend the leads a little bit out, and then they go into here. And what happens is lead goes down, and the inner side of this barrel is covered with like a rough sandpaper. I don't think I got that out far enough. You go in, and then you can hear it, but you can spin it around. It goes in like that. And those can make a point that's actually almost as sharp as a weapon. It really gets good, especially for your harder leads. And again, softer leads don't hold their point very often, and they have a little spongy thing there so you can get the dust off, but you can get a point that really is quite sharp, which is really nice for some kind of drawing, and some people really like that detail work, and these can lend themselves to that very well. So anyway, that's lead holders. You can get some really fine line work from that, and this is I think fairly soft. This is a 2B lead that's in this guy here. So lead holders, another great option. So the 5.6 mil lead holders, which come in a variety. This is a fairly nice one with wood, but they make plastic, fairly inexpensive one. Creative Color makes both the holder and the leads for these. I think some other manufacturers like Art Alternatives and so forth make them too. You can find sharpeners that have different hole sizes that may fit this. Like this guy here, you can see it has 2 openings, and so you can get that lead down in there, one of those openings, and get that sharpened up. But for the most part, what you'd use with these is the sandpaper paddles, like these guys here. And then you just basically form this in any way that you want it. If you want it sharp, if you want it dull. And it has, again, the value of having a fairly large surface area that can be utilized. The 5.6 mil leads for this are actually have much more limited, but they make a variety of other things besides lead to put in this. They make 2 types of chalk, or actually several types of chalk, but they make a really black chalk pastel and a white pastel, which is a lot of fun. But you can get sanguine and some other things that go in here besides just lead. But you can see it can make a really nice consistent area to fill in a large area quite nicely, but it still has a tip in it that can make for some fine line work. And depending on how hard you press, you can get a pretty nice mark out of it. I like to draw trees. They're easy. Anyway, you can see this has a lot of value and can be a good thing in your graphite arsenal. The final type of pencil that I want to talk about here is the mechanical pencil. These pencils hold a very thin lead in a plastic or metal fabricated pencil that allows you to extend the lead as you need it, with usually a button on the end. There are some fancy ones that extend the lead automatically, but for the most part, it requires a button to press them. This is an example. It's a Pentel Graph Gear 1000. It's a fairly expensive mechanical pencil, but it's mechanically very well designed, and it has a really nice weight to it. You can get mechanical pencils down to around $5 and as expensive as this one, which can go as much as $25 depending on where you buy it. First thing to know about the mechanical pencils is they come in different sizes, and that's the thickness of the lead that is in it. And in the US, they typically come in a 0.3 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter, 0.7 millimeter, and 0.9 millimeter. They can be found in other sizes. There's European sizes and so forth. Pentel, I believe, is the only one that now has a 0.2 millimeter lead that you can use. I find that pretty fragile. I actually do most of my drawing with a 0.5, although with a really good mechanical pencil, you can sometimes go down to a 0.3. It kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve with your pencils. Again, these are probably more designed for engineers and architects, but I find them as a good option for drawing, especially when you're traveling, because they have one superpower. They don't require sharpening, and they make very little mess, and they travel really well because they're hard, so you can throw them into a pencil bag or whatever, and they make a good drawing on the road pencil if you don't mind its limitation. And its main limitation is it makes a very consistent mark. You don't get all the variety of marks you're going to get from the more wood-based pencils or the blocks or the lead holders that I just showed you. So their superpower is a really consistent line. And that can be really nice, although where you're going to find that ends up being a problem is in kind of creating fills. They just have such a fine lead that you have to be very careful when you do a fill with them. The nice thing about them is they do make a variety of different lead hardnesses for them. And so in the consistency that I kind of talked about, I'll usually have 2 pencils, which is my 2.5s are my most common drawing. And I'll have one that's hard and one is soft. The Graph Gear 1000s kind of indicate that on the barrel right here, and so you can get the size that they are, or the weight of the lead inside, and they'll say the size on the outside there. As I described earlier, I tend to like to start a drawing with a hard pencil, and so if I get to my tree, you can see that you can get a pretty hard line, and then get my base. And then I can come in with a darker pencil and firm it up. Again, they don't have the range of the wood pencils, but for drawing on the road or so forth, they have enough of a range for me. You can see that this one, which I believe is a 3 or 4B, makes a much darker line than the light. The softer leads, you'll have to push the little button more often. And then there's a technique with these that what happens is you use them. I don't know if I can show this to you on the screen here, but they produce an edge that creates an angle. And so there'll be a sharper top and then a flatter bottom. And if you use it from one angle for too long, it'll start flattening out, which may be nice. But if you slightly rotate the pencil in your hand, you can kind of consistently keep the sharper edge down. But a soft lead in these mechanical pencils, definitely you need to push the button a lot to keep it, because it'll eats those pretty fast. So again, when you spin the lead in this, you can keep the part down that's sharp and produce a much darker line width as a result of that. They draw pretty small, so these lend themselves to that pretty nicely also. So mechanical pencils, another option. They definitely are convenient, and they're good for traveling, good for a pencil bag. You can do under drawings for watercolors and so forth. And again, they don't require sharpeners and a lot of the other things. Most of them will have a little eraser in the end of it, which is kind of convenient, although it's pretty small. I would recommend having an additional eraser. And so that's mechanical pencils. The leads you can get in a variety of things. The Pentel leads tend to look like this. They come in a container like this, and you can see inside they are really fine and small. So they're easy to lose. But you can see right on there the HB that's a HB lead. And I do have some other leads here. Paper makes the leads in the United States, and note it does say lead. And again, the size, so this is a 07 size there, and that's another HB lead. And Pentel typically color codes their lids for the sizes of them. This was a 0.5 with the black lid. I don't know if they've stayed to that consistency, but they make a variety. And then again, my approach is to have one slightly softer and one slightly harder. And then just keep in mind that the softer one is going to get eaten really fast at these small sizes. So that's mechanical pencils. So a couple last tricks that'll help you out with graphite while you're drawing and so forth is my first one is, you might have seen it when I was doing the time lapse earlier in the video, is I would often put a piece of paper down and put my hand down. And so when I grab a pencil and I want to work on it, and I don't want to smudge it because my hand will smudge what's underneath it, I'll put a piece of paper under, and that will allow me to work on different areas. Some people wear gloves and they cut fingers off of it, and they sell those gloves too that will kind of do that. But just having a piece of paper as you're working it over and then moving it around will allow you to work out into it. Another thing, again, I mentioned the overhand way of holding a pencil, but another thing that's kind of helpful for a lot of people to stay kind of loose is to hold the pencil farther out like this, and this will give a more free, natural way of drawing. And it's unintuitive, but you're going to try it, and I almost can guarantee you, if you work with it just for a few minutes, you're going to find that will be a really helpful way, rather than being really tied in like that. Another tool that is very helpful with graphite is going to be a fixative, and I tend to like to use a workable fix. This is a Winsor Newton workable fix. And what it is that, again, graphite will continue to smudge, and if you do it in sketchbooks, you'll smudge it all over the place. So the prevention to that is you spray this on. It's like a varnish for graphite. Once you put it on, you'll put it on a coat, and it will go away. You won't notice this on there at all once it dries. But fixatives come kind of in two flavors. One is a workable fix, which the Winsor Newton is, and then there's also a final fix. The final fix is designed to be the last thing you do, but workable fixes can work kind of as a final fix, but they also can work as a workable fix in that you can spray it when you get it to a place you want it, spray it, let it dry, and go back and apply more graphite or other things over it. And then another trick that I learned a while back, if you put a light coat of watercolor, this is a little heavier, but if you do graphite and then just do a little watercolor over it, that acts as a fixative. So this won't smear anymore because the gum arabic basically acts as a fixative. Okay, another little tricky thing that comes in handy is at some point you're going to get a pencil that's really, really small and it's too hard to hold on to the way you want it. And they make pencil extenders like this. And then the pencil can go into that, and this tightens down. And then you have a pencil extender, and so if you draw out a ways, you have the ability to get it out farther. So pencil extenders are handy. So that kind of sums up the pencils, but pencils have some additional tools that I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to go into more graphite options and some other options similar to graphite. So the first thing we're going to look at is the sharpener. Sharpeners come in many different shapes, sizes, and quality. As I said earlier, softer pencils require better sharpeners, otherwise you'll have a problem with the pencils breaking. For smaller portable sharpeners, there's a whole variety, and it kind of comes down to whether it has a catch or not a catch. So one of my favorite sharpeners of all time is this little M&R pineapple sharpener. It's brass, and it is really small, but it doesn't have a catch. So its disadvantage is you make a mess with it. So if you're in a class or something, they may not permit these, but I like them. I did a lot of testing on soft pencils, and this is really the one that I came down to. One of its value points is that the blades within it are replaceable, and you usually can buy them from a good art supply store. So this thing will last you forever as a result. Staedtler makes pencil sharpeners, and there's a variety of other ones that don't have catches, Pro Art and so forth. If you want a catch, that's kind of has some value to it because it doesn't make the mess. And so Faber Castell makes a good sharpener that has a catch built in that will catch all the things, and you can dump it out later. It also has 2 holes for different size pencils, which is kind of nice. The M&R makes, that I showed you earlier, it makes one that has 2 holes also for different size pencils. Another great manufacturer is Coom, and they make a variety of pencil sharpeners with catches that will sharpen different size pencils. This is another one of my favorite sharpeners. It's by Coom. It's called the Coom Eclipse. It comes in black or different colors. Coom pencil sharpeners are another pencil sharpener where you can buy replaceable blades for them, which really comes in handy. This is a pencil sharpener that has a catch to it, and then it has a little cover, makes a little nice bullet, fits in bags and so forth. So this is a great option. Also, Staedtler makes some good options also. And then we can get into the slightly bigger ones. There's you can get pencil sharpeners that mount onto your desk. This one by Derwent actually grabs the pencil, so when you pull it out like this, kind of hard to do one-handed, but it'll go in and grab the pencil, and as you do it, it will hold the pencil at the right angle and not move it. One of the common things of breaking a pencil is moving the pencil in the sharpener when you're trying to sharpen it. So these type of sharpeners, a couple of different companies make these, and they do a really good job. They also have a really nice sharpened helix center. Another good thing to find is if your mechanical sharpener has a way of expelling a broken lead, it's really nice. So that's another feature to keep an eye out. And then you can get electronic sharpeners. If you're going to do that, I would recommend reading some reviews on them. Some work well, some don't work well. And when you're sharpening very expensive pencils, as I said, normal pencils don't cost too much, but even at $2 or $3, you don't want a pencil sharpener eating these too fast. Be cautious with a cheap sharpener. Get something of quality. It will pay for itself over time. The last thing I'm going to say about sharpening is that some people like a long lead on their pencil, and it's mainly because of, as I described earlier, they like to use the overhand method of drawing. The most common way people will do that is they'll use a craft knife like this, and then they'll go in and sharpen their pencil to have a long lead. And you'll see that in YouTube videos and so forth, which is, if you need that, that's a good thing to have. The one note is as I showed you earlier, you can do the same thing with a 2mm lead holder which is really kind of a nice thing. And then you can also get pencil sharpeners that will sharpen to a long lead, such as this one was sharpened with a long point pencil sharpener. And there's a couple brands. M&R makes this one here, and it has 3 holes, and one strips away the wood, and then one will sharpen the tip. Sometimes these 3-pointed sharpeners require a little bit of talent to use, but they're definitely a lot easier than using a craft knife, and definitely a lot safer. If you're going to use a craft knife, definitely be careful. It's an art. It will take you a little bit of practice. Coom also makes a long point sharpener. It has 2 holes in it. One is, again, strips the lead away, and then the other one sharpens the end of the pencil. So you end up with a sharp but longer lead. Then there's sharpeners by other companies. This is a Blackwing sharpener that you can get, and this one makes, doesn't give this long of a lead, but it'll make a longer point, a really long lead also. But you can see it's just mainly a longer point to it rather than having an extended out lead that extends out a ways. So we're kind of getting to the end of our description of different types of graphite. I covered a variety of pencils and blocks and different shapes. It should be noted you can actually buy chunks of graphite. I think General Pencil still makes graphite chunks, just their raw graphite. And then some people mold graphite into some strange shapes like animals and things like that. So you can buy that. So graphite is a really versatile drawing tool. The final kind of thing, I kind of alluded to it earlier when I was talking about the sanding blocks. You can also buy or make graphite powder, as I showed you earlier. This is graphite powder by Watercolor, and Artgraph makes graphite powder. General makes graphite powder. So there's a lot of companies that make graphite powder, but you can also take yourself one of these bigger 9B crayon type graphite sticks and then use any of the sandpapers that I showed you earlier, and you can just grind that up and it will come down into a graphite powder. Different people have different methods of making this, but if you don't want to make it, it's just easy to buy it. And then it comes down to what do you do with this is down. And this brings up a whole nother subject of tools, and that's smudge tools. So there's a variety of ways of dealing with graphite, both from a pencil. So if I take a fairly soft pencil like this 8B, and then I put it down into an area, or I draw a shape with it, and I can throw a little graphite in here. And then I can take a variety of smudge tools. 2 of the most common ones are going to be a stomp with an O. And it's basically a compressed paper product. And then they also make tortillions, I think I'm saying that right, which is wrapped paper. Some people will take a pencil and stick it into the end of this, and then you can kind of draw with it that way. Or you can just do it with a hand. But both of these products will smear and smudge graphite in fun and interesting ways. And so for the most part, it's kind of interesting. I've noticed artists of different types tend to approach smudging differently. Some people just don't like to smudge. They want their lines to be very crisp and clean, and then other people will smudge. And so if you do want to do the smudge thing, then these are some of the tools. Another tool is this really disgusting chamois, and that will also smudge graphite. Another type of smudge tool is this tool that's sold by Golden for their pan pastels, and there's these soft tools. These are also very similar to makeup tools that you may find, but this is another option for smudging your graphite or graphite powder. You'll get in here and smudge that in even a different way than the other tools. You can also take this tool and dip it into graphite powder and then kind of draw with it. And you can see you can get some super consistent gray areas by doing this. So fun tools, powdered graphite, smudge tools. They can be used very creatively. And this brings up another whole category. And we've talked consistently about putting graphite down. Now what we're going to do is talk about removing the graphite. I think a lot of new people to art tend to think that erasers are for removing mistakes, but they can also be a drawing tool in itself. So I have this gray area that I created here, and if I get a good eraser, I can come in here and take away some of that, basically reverse drawing. So this kind of reverse drawing can be a great tool for creating artwork also, and doing things that would be very hard to do with the pencil or other tools. So another interesting thing about erasers that a lot of people don't get right is they believe that erasers rub off the graphite from the paper, but that's not really true. What it's actually doing is it's actually pulling the graphite out of the paper with the mechanical process of it shedding its own material, and that's what this grit and powder is it's basically getting into the paper and then lifting the graphite off. And so you'll notice that with the different erasers, all of them are going to shed some kind of material. So that kind of leads into erasers. I could probably make an entire video on erasers, and perhaps someday I should, but I'll give you a helpful overview. Erasers are generally cheap, and so they invite experimentation, and they do a lot of amazing things, so it's worthy of the experimenting. A good place to start with experimenting is this Prismacolor package that has 3 types of erasers. It has a kneadable eraser, a gum eraser, and a plastic eraser, all in one package, and that's going to be some of the erasers I'm going to be talking about here. So erasers have a little bit of an interesting history, somewhat like graphite. The first eraser was actually mashed up bread. I wonder how they figured that out. Yet in the 18th century, an Englishman, Joseph Priestley, found that the latex that came from a tree made a good rubber for removing graphite. And believe it or not, that is how the tree got its name, not the other way around. And finally, in the 19th century, Charles Goodyear discovered vulcanization, and now we have great erasers and tires and stuff like that too. For starters, it's important that you realize that most artists that work with graphite use erasers for more than just fixing mistakes. They are often used as a part of the drawing process and can be used to create effects that would be hard to do with the point of a pencil alone. As a result, you shouldn't feel bad about using an eraser in your work. Like most art supplies, it is up to the artist to figure out how to use the eraser in your process, but I'll give you a few starters here. Erasers come in many materials and shapes and sizes. Getting the right eraser for the right medium, paper, technique is important. Also, not all erasers are appropriate for graphite drawing. The majority of types you're probably going to want to use are the kneadable eraser and a gum eraser, which is this guy there, and a plastic eraser, which is this very dirty Staedtler plastic eraser. Each of these types of erasers has attributes that lead to different techniques. I do want to point out that the hard plastic erasers, especially the ones with sand in them, such as this mono sand eraser, and a lot of the plastic erasers you use in school are going to be too rough on your paper to actually use for art reasons. This would include the rubber eraser that was on the end of the yellow number 2. Not a good art eraser. So the job of a good eraser is to lift as much graphite off the paper without smudging it or without abrading the paper. If you end up damaging the paper, you'll end up with a blemish that will probably attract more graphite and be an eyesore in your final work. And so using the right eraser with the right paper and the right technique is really vital. So there's a little bit of practice is involved in this, but most of the art erasers I'm going to talk about here generally will work good on most of the art papers that I described. First eraser we're going to talk about is the kneadable or kneaded or putty eraser, different words for the same thing. It is like the name says, they are a putty-like eraser. Instead of lifting and discharging the graphite, it just grabs a hold of it and pulls it up. And so you can see that happening here as I go through and press. You can do this, but what it is this grabbing the graphite and putting it into the eraser itself. And then the trick is you go and then you knead that up into the eraser for a while, again, we'll make it all clean and ready to pick up more graphite. And the fun thing with the graphite eraser is that you can do some really interesting shapes and so forth. And the fact that you can mold this eraser into different shapes can allow you to get into the graphite in different ways and do edges and various other things. But again, it'll grab the graphite and pull it up into it, and you just knead it away. And it does not leave anything on the paper as far as dust or so forth, but it should be noted that there is an oil in these kneaded erasers, and that oil can end up on the paper. And so if you're going to combine this with any water-soluble type mediums like watercolor or water-based markers or so forth, you might test it out. You'd hate to get well into a work only to find that the oils from this are causing some grief with your water-based mediums. And then the final trick with the gum erasers is at some point they're just going to get disgusting, and I have a few really disgusting ones over there, and then it's just time to replace them. The Faber Castell one and some of the other ones come with a little plastic box for them, which is kind of good because they'll grab onto other things and dirt and so forth, which will cause them to degrade before their time. So if you keep them in a nice little plastic box or get one with a plastic box, they will typically last longer. So the rubber eraser is very similar to the erasers you probably use in school, except they're a lot softer than the school type erasers, a lot easier on the paper. Rubber erasers are another really good eraser. As you can see, it picks up a great deal of graphite fairly easily, and it won't mar the paper. It does create a lot of crumblies, which brings up another thing about erasers, is those crumblies, which is picking up the graphite, will end up on here. And the natural thing you're going to want to do is move it with your hand, but that could very possibly ruin your drawing by smudging your graphite. And so the best way to do it, if you can, is to pick up your paper and shake it upside down. And if you can't do that, the next best option is going to be one of these dust brushes. They're usually found in the drafting section in your art supply store, but then you can brush this away. But as you can see, if you have graphite just sitting on the page, it will smear that. But for the most part, if your graphite's down, this is a good option. But as I said earlier, the best option is just to turn the paper over and shake it if you can. So gum erasers are like the rubber eraser, yet even the next level of softness. Their advantage is they'll work very effectively on graphite, except they tend to crumble and make even more of a mess than the other erasers we talked about. So having some kind of dust brush or shaking it off is a necessity. I would only use these probably for the most fragile of papers in situations. They will pull even heavy graphite off, but as you can see, they make quite a mess. So this leaves us with the last eraser we're going to talk about, and that's a plastic eraser. And this is one of the most popular erasers, and it comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And it's a little bit harder than the gum eraser or the rubber eraser we just did, but it has the advantage that it doesn't create quite as much garbage as it does its lifting process. So it still makes a little bit of stuff that will come off, but it tends to be more of a dust-like thing than the other erasers. It probably has a little bit better lifting capability than the other ones, but it's going to be a little bit harder on the paper itself. One of the advantages of this type of eraser is you can use a craft knife and cut it into different shapes, as with the other ones, but this one, because they're harder, will hold that shape for longer. So you can create shapes to create different kinds of marks when you're trying to draw with your eraser, as I was showing you earlier. Beyond that, this is again one of the more popular erasers. They do end up getting dirty after a while, so you wipe them off or clean them off to get them to be white again. They do make plastic erasers actually in black also, and it's for erasing on darker papers, so you don't have the whiteness on the paper. But for the most part, the plastic erasers are going to be the cleanest. One of the other superpowers of the plastic eraser is all the shapes and sizes plastic erasers come in. Companies like Pentel have made a soft plastic eraser. They call it high polymer soft, and it will work on more fragile papers than the harder plastic erasers will. So one of the cool things about plastic erasers is they come in a lot of shapes and sizes, and two of my favorites are these. This is a Facet BM2 that's sold by General Pencil in the United States. And it is basically a mechanical eraser that you can extend out or push in to get the right length that you want. You can cut the ends off of them using a craft knife. You can cut it off and you can get a nice sharp point on it by cutting it off like that. And they, like the other erasers, they can do some really fun shapes, lines, and they relieve graphite fairly well. So again, another drawing tool. And then my favorite of all time would be the Tombow Mono Eraser, which is very similar to the Facet, except it's a very small tip. And again, it's mechanical, so it extends out just like the other one, and it's refillable. And because it's so small, you can do really fine work. You can get in and clean up lines on things, like where I went out of the lines on this ball. I can get in here really easily and clean those edges up. I can reverse draw another tree or other things that I want. So these are really, really fantastic sharpeners. I recommend having one or both of these around. I actually use them both. I keep this one much more blunter for larger areas, and then I like to use this one for really detail areas. So I was going to show you a trick before I go to the last thing. And if you have a really dark lead on your paper, we'll just get a clean spot here. We have this really dark, I get this 8B and I get it in here. And typically that would be very hard to erase. But the trick is you do a two-step process. You start off the kneadable eraser and you lift as much of the graphite as you can with this eraser, which has done a fairly good job. But then you go in with the plastic eraser and do the final work. And this can do a really good job of lifting a heavy graphite off paper, which can be really difficult. I believe it works for color pencil too. And then the final thing we're going to look at is an electric eraser, which a lot of people may think is kind of a funny luxury, but it actually can be, for someone who's using erasers as part of the creative process, it is a nice tool for extending that ability. So you can go in and actually go through and erase fairly large areas fairly well. It has a plastic eraser in it. It's replaceable, takes batteries, although there's some USB chargeable ones out by Iwata, I believe. These can come in handy. I don't use these terribly often. I obviously own one, but it's not my go-to tool, but some people love these things. So I wanted to make sure I noted that in the eraser section. Okay, that pretty much covers erasers for the most part. The type of erasers you would generally use for art. My personal favorites are going to be a plastic eraser like this, and then in the form of, again, I really like these mechanical style. They also travel well. So I like the plastic, and then I think my second favorite is going to be the kneadable eraser. That is, I think, is another great tool. And again, combining the kneadable eraser with the plastic eraser makes for a really great erasing ability, and both of them have creative options. Very good tools all around. But again, erasers are cheap. My recommendation is buy different ones and see what works for you and what you like. Okay, so now I did promise you some things you're gonna love. So these are things that are lesser known or kind of a derivative of graphite, or like graphite but not graphite. So I'm going to start with one that is basically graphite that is really popular. It is the Prismacolor Ebony Pencil, and it's a real popular for drawing. It has a really thick core to it, and it has a slightly warmer tone graphite. So it's a little different shade than the graphite that comes out of the other pencils. It's soft, softer. I don't know where it rates in the softness scale. But they say it's jet black extra smooth is this definition, and it is a real popular pencil. It's fairly affordable. They sell it in 2-packs, or some places will sell it singly, but it's a fairly dark black, And it just has a nice tone to it. And again, as I've seen with others, you can kind of go the other way and get some additional blackness. So just as a reference, I pulled out a couple of the Staedtler. So this is a 4B. It looks a little softer than the 4B. Yeah, it looks like it's in the range of about a 6B. But anyway, that's the Prismacolor Ebony. It's a real popular pencil for drawing. Some teachers use it in schools and so forth. So I felt like I needed to mention that. It is considered graphite. So that is a cool pencil. Actually, it says here it's actually a Sanford, which is a company that actually owns Prismacolor. I've always known it as Prismacolor, but they might know it as a Sanford. A couple other things to note about graphite powder is that it can be applied with different things other than the smudge tools. Some people apply graphite powder with a brush, and that can make a really soft, nice look too. But one of the things a few artists are doing with graphite powder to get a really dark look to it is to apply it with some kind of liquid. And one of the possibilities is actually using water, and I have a water brush here that is empty. So I have here a water brush, and it's just a brush that has water in the handle. So one of the ways you can move this graphite and get it onto a surface is with water. And so if I get a little water out here in the brush tip, I can pull the graphite and then make a really dark black area with it, which can be very interesting way of applying graphite. And you can go out and by adding more water, it will kind of flow like other wet mediums such as watercolor and so forth. The one note is that once this dries, it is probably not going to be erasable. Then there's people that are experimenting with other things. They're using solvents such as turpentine, or Gansai. Now, if you're going to use this, you need to be very careful. These are flammable and not healthy to breathe, so they're good to use in well-ventilated spaces. You should look into precautions and figure that out. And then the other thing you can actually mix with it is linseed oil. And linseed oil will also pull this out and leave a very dark matte finish to it, which is kind of cool. But it should be noted that linseed oil is going to take a long time to dry. So it could take weeks, if not more, time to dry. And then the final thing you could probably add to this, which I have not actually seen, but I have heard people say you can add mediums to this. And so one medium that would probably carry this very well would be gum arabic, which is the medium that watercolor is the base medium for watercolor. So those are options you can do with powdered graphite, and just be aware that once this dries, you probably are not going to be able to erase it, so you want to get it into the areas you want. I've seen people that will draw images and then want a really dark background, and you can use the water, solvents, or oils, or otherwise to create that really dark background. But you can see this is super, super dark, and it's kind of dry. I bet I'm going to ruin my paper. The other thing is that this is draw paper, which is probably the wrong paper to do this on. You probably want to do this on a mixed media paper or a watercolor paper. But as I thought, you are not erasing that, so it is down. Another thing to try. So the next thing is another thing that's considered graphite is something that came out fairly recently. Faber Castell brought it out, and I was kind of showing you how graphites have a sheen to them, and that is kind of the bane of some graphite artists. You just kind of learn to live with it or whatever. So we're going to take a really dark graphite pencil. This is an 8B Staedtler, and I'm going to put a swatch of it out. Again, I can spin it in my hand to create even a darker, keeping an edge on it. So that's an 8B Staedtler, and that's going to have a little bit of the glare. You're not going to see it from this angle, but you know, in the right light, it will be a little glary. So what Faber Castell did is they released a couple of years back a series of pencils that they refer to as the Pitt Graphics Matte Pencils. And so they're basically a graphite with some magic in it. So what they did is all these discussions I was talking about, the softest pencil that a lot of these people make is either the 8B or possibly even a 9B as the softest pencil. But the first thing they did, Faber-Castell did, is they took their line of soft pencils and went from the 8B and took it all the way up to 14B. So it's an extremely soft pencil. And then they also somehow reconfigured it so that the actual texture that comes out of it is a matte finish, which even makes the black darker. So this is the 14B. So it makes a pretty dark line, and possibly if I did this a little bit steeper, you're going to see that you can get it to be really quite black. And in fairness, I'll get the 8B and go over it at a steeper angle so that we can do fair to fair here. And it isn't super, but you can definitely see that the Faber-Castell is a blacker black, less gray. So again, you can see the sheen on those, the ones I did earlier. And then we'll come down and you can see that there's a lot less. That's the 8B. And then that's the Faber-Castell. And you can see the ones in the background. So it's a much darker matte black finish. So it's not life-changing, but there's definitely a difference, and it's probably more visual, not on camera. I tend to like to throw it into drawings just in the shadow area to kind of get that next level of blackness so it increases the contrast of graphite. I've always find that graphite tends to be a little bit on the flat side. This definitely takes it to give it a little more contrast, more range. So I'd highly recommend checking that out. These are the Faber-Castell Pitt Graphite Matte. And they come in up to a 14B. You can get them in sets, or you can get them individually in some art supply stores. So in that vein, a few years before Faber-Castell came out with their matte pencils, Staedtler came out with a line of pencils, and they did something kind of equally interesting. They call these the Staedtler Mars Lumographic Blacks, and they're only in the soft pencils, and only in every other one. So you can get them in 2B, 4B, 6B, and 8B. And what they've done is they have mixed, instead of just graphite, they've mixed 50% of it is carbon. So it's a carbon graphite mix, and that creates a darker, blacker black. And so I'm going to get the 8B, and we'll put it alongside the Faber-Castell. And really it's a tone difference that you're going to get with these, is they are a more true black rather than kind of a gray black. The Faber-Castell definitely, I see this as kind of a grayer. The Faber-Castell is blacker, but still a little bit gray. This is a true black. And it too has a very low sheen to it. So, okay, again, normal graphite, you can see how sheeny it is. And then that one's normal graphite. That's the Faber-Castell. You can see a little sheen, but it's really very little. And then that's the Mars Lumographic Black. And you can see it's probably the blackest of the three. It does have a little bit of a pitfall. Some artists claim that they don't like the drag. Graphite has a specific feel when you're using it on paper. And the Lumographic Black has a different tug. And there's another black that I don't have. It's called a Wolf Carbon Black, which is a complete carbon pencil. And it does have a different feel. The other thing that you might find is it doesn't erase. See, it just smudges with an eraser. So it's not going to erase. The Faber-Castell definitely does erase. And of course the 8B definitely erases, but this just smudges. I don't know if there's an eraser that would get this. Okay, this plastic eraser is getting it a little bit, but it's still not great. So it's a erasability, and then the feel as a pencil is going to be different. But if you can get over those minor problems, it still is a really nice dark black that will increase the contrast of your drawings considerably. Okay, so now we're going to get into another world of pencils, and these are pencils that are water soluble, and which means that you can pull them with water. So normal graphite on paper, it may pull or smudge a little bit with water, but for the most part, it's not going to move a whole lot. So what we're going to look at is a handful of products. Again, this is a water pen. It has water in the base, and so it just pulls water out into the brush. They're really handy. So there's a variety of graphite pencils that are water soluble. I have a couple by Artgraph. They make a set of 6B and a 2B, and Faber Castell makes some water soluble, and Kuretake, their monolith series of Woodless pencils are water soluble. And you can usually see that most companies that make a water soluble product will put this little brush on it as a symbol that it's water soluble. You can see it. Well, their brush is a little bit different on the Artgraph, but it's right there. And water soluble is just a lot of fun. It just means you can kind of throw a line down or a shape down, and then you can grab it, a wet brush, and then pull it. And so there's a lot of fun things you can do with that. It can create some really wonderful shading effects. And you can use it a lot like a watercolor pencil in a lot of ways, except it's graphite and can be combined very nicely with graphite. It will work in with your other parts of your drawing if you wish to do that. So that's a water-soluble graphite, comes in different forms. So the next product we're going to get is, we're going back to the carbon. So this is a Artgraph soft carbon pencil. Again, it has a little bit of a brush on it, signifying it's water-soluble. Has a nice thick core to it. And it is carbon, and it's water-soluble carbon. And the cool thing about it is, again, you can kind of put down something and it's going to be a blacker black than you're going to see with graphite. It's very, very soft. As a matter of fact, when I was looking, my whole thing with sharpeners was a result of me going and trying to figure out how to sharpen this particular pencil because it's super, super sharp. And that's where I found the M&R pineapple sharpener. It works really good for those and other watercolor pencils. But so this is, again, the Artgraph soft carbon, but you can see if I hit it with water, it just turns super black. It's super easy to pull. It tends to be granulating, and it's just a lot of fun. And so you can do a lot of different art with that. It can be added with other things, watercolor or whatnot, but it is a really fun product. And so you can get a lot of carbon on the paper, and then it pulls really easily with water. I actually showed this off in a video a couple videos ago on monochrome. So another fun product, and that is the Artgraph soft carbon pencil. Another fun toy to play around with. That's not graphite, but really, really close. Okay, so I've covered a few of the other things. Now we're going to get into things that are kind of variations on graphite. So Derwent has 2 lines, or a variety of lines of these graphic tints. And so these are graphite, but they're tinted with color. So these are a water-soluble pencil again, and they come in a lot of different colors, but it's basically a graphite base to them. And just like these other ones, you can kind of come in here and draw some shapes. And I'm just drawing trees with whatever color comes out in my hand, so you'll have to excuse me there. And the cool thing about these graphic tints is because they have a graphite base to them, they have that kind of metallic sheen into them that kind of is an undercurrent to these. So I can now go and pull this with water similar to the other things. It's not quite as juicy as the Artgraph right there, but it's fairly juicy. When I say juicy, it just means how easily it pulls or if lines are left afterwards. So again, a real fun, really interesting color combination and set. Easy to pull, could be combined with other elements. They also make that in a pan set. These are a pan version of the graphic tints. I brush off a little bit and get another. But as they dry, they'll kind of take on that metallic sheen to them that you would see in graphite. Where on the graphite side, it's kind of not good, but because this is being diluted with water and changed, it tends to add something to the image a bit. So anyway, those are graphic tints, and these are both Derwent products, both the pencils and these. So it's slightly like graphite, and why we're talking Derwent has a lot of fun things. So Derwent also has these big XL graphic blocks. They come in sets of different colors, and these are graphite. They're not saying that they're water soluble. They look a bit like that. And again, just a great mark making tool. You can get in here and make some really fun marks with them. You can loosen up quite a bit if you like to do abstract work, but it has a lot of really fun colors. Well, I should say 6 fun colors. And they're really, really soft. So another fun tool. So again, there's a lot of really great options in graphite, and I have one last graphite thing to show you, and it's very similar to the graphic tints. So these are Gansai Tambi. I can never say that. It's based on a Japanese watercolors, and Kuretake makes all kinds of these in a standard Gansai Tambi watercolors, which is a Japanese, and they tend to have the Japanese palette to them. But these, like the graphic tints, are graphite based and have these different tints and colors. And they too can make some very interesting, fun things happen. So this is a whole line. I think they have more colors. This just has 6 colors. It was a pack that I picked up somewhere, but another really fun tool that has a graphite base. So anyway, there's a whole mess of graphites that isn't quite graphite. I hope this video gave you some inspirations to try drawing in graphite or help you better understand the art supply in a way that will help improve your art. This is a huge topic, and if you have more information you want to share on it, please comment below and help the community out. I think drawing in graphite is an important skill for most artists, and I plan to do more content on this. If you want to see that when it gets posted, why don't you subscribe below? It is free to you, and it tells YouTube that you want to see more of We Talk Art content, and it helps out the channel a lot. So if you do that, I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay, everybody, I did want to warn you that if you're going to do something creative, you might end up with some collateral damage. I also wanted to let you know that I'm a big fan of shopping local, so if you have a local art supply store, try to find these products there and buy it from them. If not, I have links in the show notes, which could be below on your computer, on the side on your tablet, or somewhere else on your TV set, that have affiliate links to all these products so you can find them and figure out what they are. And if you want to support the channel a little bit, you can order from there. Now go out and make some graphite art.